There's a strange kind of panic that starts to visit people in their 30s. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that announces itself with sirens. It's quieter than that. It shows up in the car after work when the engine is off and the silence is just a little too honest. It shows up when you see someone your age buy a house you can't imagine affording. It shows up when your parents start looking older, when your calendar gets fuller, when your expenses stop feeling temporary. It shows up when you realize life is no longer in the someday phase. And that's the moment a lot of people finally understand money. Not because they suddenly become greedy. Because they finally become aware of time. That's the part nobody tells you. Most millionaires don't build wealth because they were obsessed with money at 22. A lot of them weren't. They were messy, distracted, underpaid, trying things, making mistakes, wasting years in ways that felt harmless because youth makes almost everything feel reversible. Then their 30s arrive. And for the first time, life stops feeling theoretical. That's why this decade matters so much. Not because your 30s are magical. Not because there's some hidden age where the universe rewards discipline. Your 30s become powerful because the illusions start dying. And once the illusions die, the real game begins. In your 20s, most people are not building wealth. They're building identities. Even the ambitious ones. They're testing cities, jobs, relationships, beliefs, aesthetics, friend groups, entire versions of themselves. They switch careers. They chase status. They chase freedom. They chase the feeling of being impressive. They make a little more money and immediately spend it in ways that help them feel like they've become someone. Which is understandable. Your 20s are a decade of motion. You're not just trying to survive. You're trying to locate yourself in the world. So people spend. They spend on rent in places they can barely afford because the neighborhood says something about who they are. They spend on clothes, trips, cars, dinners, weddings, convenience, subscriptions, gadgets, and little luxuries that seem justified because, after all, they're working hard and life is happening now. And underneath all of it, there's a deeper assumption: I have time to get serious later. That sentence has destroyed more futures than bad luck ever did. Because later feels free when you're 24. It feels abundant. Endless, even. But time doesn't disappear all at once. It narrows. At 31, 32, 35, something changes. You begin to see that every financial choice is not just a purchase. It is a direction. A system. A vote for the kind of life that will eventually trap you or free you. That's when the decade becomes dangerous. And, if you're paying attention, valuable. Most people think wealth is built with intelligence. It helps, of course. But that's not the decisive factor. If intelligence were enough, there wouldn't be so many highly educated, chronically broke adults earning respectable salaries and quietly drowning under lifestyles they can't sustain. Wealth is built when behavior changes. And behavior usually changes when reality becomes personal. Your 30s make reality personal. This is the decade when the bill arrives for every vague financial habit you thought you'd clean up eventually. The decade when debt stops looking manageable and starts looking heavy. The decade when I'm still figuring it out begins to sound less like freedom and more like drift. The decade when your peers split in two directions so dramatically it can almost make you sick to watch. One person is still performing success. The other has started building it. And from the outside, the difference is almost invisible at first. They both have jobs. They both look fine. They both post photos. They both say they're busy. But one person's income disappears the moment it arrives. The other has started turning income into assets, skills, equity, optionality, time. That's the quiet divide. Wealth doesn't usually begin with a windfall. It begins with a refusal. A refusal to keep bleeding money just to maintain an identity. A refusal to confuse high consumption with high standards. A refusal to keep leasing a life that looks expensive but has no foundations underneath it. That refusal becomes more common in your 30s because life gets less theatrical and more structural. You start noticing what actually holds a person up. It's not the image. It's the system. And your 30s are often the first decade when you can build a real one. By then, you usually know more than you did at 23. You've gotten better at something. Maybe several things. Your earning power, if you've been moving at all, is typically stronger. You understand office politics better. You understand people better. You understand yourself better. You know what kinds of work drain you, what kinds sharpen you, what you can tolerate, what you can master, what markets value, what skills actually compound. That's not a small thing. In your 20s, effort is often scattered. In your 30s, effort can become directed. And directed effort is worth far more than raw energy. A 24-year-old can hustle harder than a 34-year-old. Of course. More stamina. Fewer obligations. More recoverable mistakes. But the 34-year-old who knows where to aim is often far more dangerous. Because wealth is not built by motion. It's built by leverage. And leverage becomes easier to access in your 30s. You have a track record now. Maybe not an extraordinary one, but enough for the world to start taking your competence seriously. Enough to negotiate. Enough to raise prices. Enough to ask for ownership instead of just salary. Enough to build something on the side that isn't based on blind hope but on actual experience. Enough to recognize whether the next 5 years will make you richer or simply more exhausted. This is where people miss the deeper truth behind the title. Your 30s are not the best decade to build wealth because of time alone. If time were the only factor, your 20s would win every single time. No. Your 30s are the best decade because they sit at the intersection of three things that almost never arrive together again. Still enough time for compounding to matter, enough maturity for discipline to become real, and enough pain for denial to become expensive. That combination changes people. The person who laughed at budgeting at 25 starts opening investment accounts at 33. The person who spent years upgrading appearances starts caring about cash flow. The person who used to think wealth was about income starts realizing it's about ownership. The person who thought money management was restrictive starts seeing it for what it really is, a way of buying back the future. And the future in your 30s starts to feel very close. That's another reason millionaires often begin here. Not finish here. Begin here. People love the fantasy of the early prodigy. The founder at 21. The investor at 19. The genius who knew exactly what to do before most people knew how to do laundry. Those stories are seductive because they make wealth look glamorous and exceptional. But most wealth is not built that way. Most wealth is built by people who slowly become allergic to financial chaos. People who get tired of earning good money and having nothing to show for it. People who stop chasing every upgrade. People who learn one brutally adult lesson. If your lifestyle expands as fast as your income, your life will stay expensive no matter how successful you look. And your 30s are when that lesson starts to cut. Because this is also when life crowds in. Maybe a child arrives. Maybe a mortgage. Maybe aging parents. Maybe health issues. Maybe layoffs. Maybe a marriage. Maybe a divorce. Maybe just the dawning awareness that you cannot build a serious life on financial improvisation forever. Suddenly the stakes are no longer abstract. You don't want money because money is shiny. You want margin. You want to be able to say no. You want to survive a bad year without becoming someone you don't respect. You want to stop making choices from urgency. You want your family to be safe. You want breathing room. That is such a different psychological fuel than ambition in your 20s. It is colder, deeper, less performative, more durable. And durable motivation builds durable wealth. Think about two people. The first spends most of their 20s chasing momentum. New cities, new jobs, better apartment, nicer car, more expensive habits each time income rises. Nothing looks reckless in isolation. In fact, it all looks normal. Deserved, even. But beneath the surface, there is no architecture. Just a series of payments. The lifestyle keeps getting upgraded, but the foundation never does. The second also wastes time in their 20s, maybe in different ways. They don't start early. They're not a savant. But somewhere in their early 30s, they have a moment. Maybe it's seeing a bank balance after years of work and feeling slightly ill. Maybe it's being one layoff away from panic. Maybe it's realizing that everyone around them talks about money as if stress is just part of adulthood and they don't want that story anymore. So they change. Not dramatically at first. That's another myth. Wealth doesn't always begin with a dramatic reinvention. Often it begins with a quiet reorganization. They stop trying to look rich. They stop financing identity through consumption. They stop saying yes to every social cost of belonging. They raise their savings rate before they raise their visible standard of living. They invest automatically. They become harder to impress and harder to manipulate. They focus on increasing income, yes, but they also do something much rarer. They protect the gap between what they earn and what they spend. That gap is where wealth is born. Not in the paycheck. In the gap. A surprising number of adults spend their entire lives trying to increase income without ever defending that space. So every promotion disappears. Every bonus evaporates. Every financial win gets absorbed by a more expensive life. More square footage, more subscriptions, more maintenance, more image management, more low-grade obligations dressed up as success. By their late 30s, they're earning far more than they once dreamed of and feel less free than they did when they were broke. That is one of adulthood's cruelest tricks. You can spend 10 years climbing and realize the ladder was attached to a treadmill. This is why your 30s are so decisive. This is the decade when you either build a machine that quietly works for you, or you become the machine that works endlessly for everything around you. And the scary part is how normal the second path looks. No alarms. No dramatic collapse. Just years of competent busyness with no real escape velocity. That's what wasting your 30s actually means. It doesn't always look like recklessness. Sometimes it looks like being responsible in all the wrong directions. Paying for the image before securing the infrastructure. Optimizing comfort before building resilience. Chasing income while neglecting ownership. Treating raises like permission slips to consume more instead of chances to become permanently stronger. You don't waste your 30s only by doing foolish things. You can waste them doing respectable things for reasons that quietly sabotage your future. That's why the people who build wealth in this decade often don't feel louder than everyone else. They feel different in subtler ways. They become less emotionally reactive to social comparison. They stop making financial decisions to keep pace with people they don't actually want to become. They understand that every recurring expense is a tiny employee you now have to feed forever. They begin to value boring things with almost ruthless seriousness. Automated investing, emergency reserves, lower fixed costs, high-value skills, equity, patience, tax efficiency, sleep. Especially sleep. Because one of the hidden luxuries of wealth building is psychological quiet. It's the ability to think long-term because your life isn't always on fire. That is another reason millionaires often start in their 30s. They begin to understand that wealth is not just accumulation. It is the reduction of chaos. And chaos is expensive. Chaos makes you overpay, underplan, sell too soon, panic, numb yourself, seek convenience, avoid numbers, postpone decisions, and stay dependent on systems that benefit from your confusion. Wealth requires clarity. Not perfect discipline. Clarity. The clarity to see that nobody is coming to rescue your future. The clarity to see that a high salary without a strategy is just a better dressed trap. The clarity to see that financial adulthood begins the moment you stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "What is this costing my future freedom?" That question changes people. It changes what kind of home they buy, what kind of car they drive, what kind of work they tolerate, what kind of status games they retire from, what kind of risks they finally become willing to take. Because here's the beautiful irony, the more financially grounded people become in their 30s, the bolder they often get. Not with consumption. With life. They ask for more. They leave bad jobs. They start businesses more intelligently. They invest with patience. They build second income streams. They negotiate from steadiness instead of fear. They can wait. And waiting, in a world addicted to immediacy, becomes a devastating advantage. A person with no margin has to react. A person with reserves can choose. Choice is where power lives. And that's what people are really sensing when they look at self-made wealth and feel a kind of envy they can't quite name. They're not just reacting to the money. They're reacting to the freedom embedded inside it. The unspoken ability to withstand pressure. To make moves without desperation. To walk away. Your 30s are the first decade when many people become capable of building that kind of power with intention. Not because it's easy. Because they finally understand what the alternative costs. That's the shift. In your 20s, consequences are often delayed. In your 30s, they start arriving on schedule. And if you're wise, that doesn't depress you. It clarifies you. It forces a decision. Will you keep decorating a life you don't control? Or will you start building one? Because that's what wealth building really is in this decade. It's not an aesthetic. It's not a personality. It's not a genre of content. It's construction. Slow, unglamorous, highly emotional construction. It's saying no when yes would look better. It's living below what you can impress people with. It's learning the numbers you once avoided. It's admitting that some of your habits were never rewards. They were sedation. It's accepting that the future won't be improved by hoping harder. It will be improved by systems. And systems feel boring until the day they save you. One day you look up and the emergency that would have wrecked you doesn't. The layoff doesn't become an identity crisis. The market drop doesn't force a panic sale. The medical bill doesn't turn into debt. The opportunity arrives and for once, you can actually take it. That's when people outside your life will say something simplistic. You got lucky. You're good with money. You're doing well. They won't see the years of invisible restraint. The identity you had to shed. The ego you had to disappoint. The impulses you had to stop feeding. The fact that real wealth often starts with grief. Grief for the version of adulthood you thought you were supposed to perform. Grief for the years you spent buying symbols instead of substance. Grief for how expensive insecurity can be. But if you make it through that part, something powerful happens. Money stops being emotional theater.
It becomes a tool.
And when that happens, your 30s stop being a decade of pressure and become a decade of momentum. That's why this window matters so much. You still have enough runway for consistent investing to turn into something serious. You still have enough energy to increase earnings aggressively. You still have enough flexibility to redesign your habits before they fossilize. You still have enough future left for small disciplines to become large outcomes.
But not forever.
That's the piece people resist. Your 30s are forgiving compared to later decades, but they are not endlessly forgiving. Waste them, and the math gets colder.
The catch-up gets harder.
The obligations get heavier. The ability to recover from drift becomes more expensive. So no, the real mistake is not failing to be rich by 30. That was never the standard. The mistake is reaching your 30s and still living like time is loose, choices are reversible, and income alone will save you.
It won't.
Income can make your life look impressive. Only systems can make it secure. And once you see that clearly, really clearly, something in you settles. You stop craving the appearance of arrival. You become interested in permanence.
In sturdiness.
In the quiet dignity of having your life actually hold. That is why so many millionaires begin here. Not because their 30s gave them money. Because their 30s finally taught them what money is for. And once you learn that, once you stop using money to decorate your identity and start using it to defend your future, everything changes. The decade doesn't feel smaller.
It feels sharper.
More expensive, yes.
But also more honest.
And honesty, when you use it well, can make you wealthy. So if you're in your 30s right now, this is not the moment to mourn the years you didn't optimize. It's the moment to become dangerous in a quieter way. To get serious without becoming loud. To build something nobody claps for at first. To let other people chase the signal while you construct the source. Because years from now, the real flex won't be that you looked successful early. It'll be that when life got real, you did too. And that's when wealth usually starts.
Not with a windfall. Not with genius.
With reality.
With restraint.
With a person who finally understands that the future is not something you enter. It's something you build.